Hey, good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for joining us for the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Rights Fee Stakeholder Meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through the Zoom and webcast platforms and is also being recorded. My name is David Ceccarelli. I am the Fee and Revenue Branch Chief within the Division of Administrative Services. Today, we have many of the Fee and Revenue Branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that this meeting runs as smooth as possible. If any time throughout this event you find that you're having any technical difficulties, please email waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov. And the email is currently on the screen, and it's also on the agenda. Also joining us today is John Russell, the Deputy Director of Division of Administrative Services. Also assisting me with the presentation today is Cassandra White, the SSM2, and also Joshua Wilburn, SSM1 in the Fee and Revenue Branch. So thank you, Cassandra and Josh. Individuals attending via Zoom, please use the raise the hand function if you'd like to ask a question or provide a comment. If you're joining us through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or ask a question by, again, emailing us based on the email that's on the screen right now, the waterrightsfees@waterboards.ca.gov. In the past, there have been some delays in the broadcast through the webcast. Therefore, through the meeting, staff may pause so the broadcast can catch up to the listeners. Again, we thank you for joining us virtually today. We thank you for your patience as we move to this 100% virtual meeting space. We're doing our best to ensure everyone can participate in an effective manner. So let's go over some meeting guidelines. One, remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via the email. If you do not have the handouts, don't worry, we'll be sharing the documents on the screen. You can request a copy of the documents after the meeting, or the handouts are posted on the Water Board's fee webpage. Remember, any technical issues you're having, please email us. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Remember, again, you can submit comments and questions throughout the event through the email that's provided on the screen. And for the meeting to run efficiently and to stay on track, we're requesting each participant who wants to ask a question to please ask one question at a time. I understand you may have a clarifying question to your original question, and that's acceptable. Once your question is fully answered, we're going to move on to the next participant's question, and you'll be put back into the order of participants who are requesting to ask a question. In addition, we respect all opinions and input. However, if the discussion starts to move away from the intent of the meeting, which is to discuss the water rights fees, then I'm going to ask that the participant and I meet offline to coordinate these discussions further and involve the appropriate staff as needed. So at this point, let's go ahead and review the agenda. So the second item on this agenda, item 2, is the Water Rights Fund condition, which is attachment 1 in the handout. Item 3 is the Water Rights Budget Cost Drivers, which is attachment 2. Item 4 has to do with the Water Rights Budget Change Proposals that are involved in the Water Rights Fund. So the Water Rights Fund budget change proposals. And there is one currently, which is the fiscal year 23-24 budget change proposal named the Division of Administrative Services Support. Item 5 is proposed changes to SGMA fee regulations. And then item 6 is an open discussion. And then item 7 will be discussing next steps in the fee setting process. So before we go ahead and start the meeting, I just wanted to introduce John Russell, the Deputy Director of Division of Administrative Services, and ask if he has any opening statements.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to say my typical introduction that I usually do. Thank you all for taking a few minutes out of your day to join us for this stakeholder meeting. I know you're all busy, but we really do value your input on this process, and we want you to stay as informed about it as possible. So thank you for that. And then as we go through this, if there's any questions or anything that we don't provide to you today that you want to follow up on, feel free to give David Josh or myself a call or an email, and we can follow up with you. We don't expect everybody to absorb all of this today while we're having the meeting. There's a lot of information to present. So feel free to follow up with any clarifying things that you might want to. And with that, I'll hand it over to David.
Thanks, John. So let's just move into it. Let's go to item number 2, which is the water rights fund condition. So as many of you may remember at our last fee stakeholder meeting in March, it was the first time in several years that we were able to provide the fund condition statement with updated information. Basically, things haven't changed much here. We looking at the current year projected fiscal year 22, 23 beginning balance is about 5 million. We're projecting collecting about 32 million in fee revenue. And as you come down, total revenue is expected to be almost 34 million. I know this is on 2 pages, so Gary, I'm going to ask you to just kind of scroll down. And our state operations side of the house expenditures are 29.3 million, with total expenditures being roughly about 34 million, which there's a deficit, meaning, and what we always try to do is we try to get this as close to 0 as possible. This just basically is comparing our total expenditures or total revenues. So our ending balance is about 4.9 million and about a 15% reserve, which is starting to drive down from the year before in 21, 22. So looking at the upcoming year in 23, 24, if we didn't do any fee increases, basically what this would reflect is that we start to build a structural deficit, meaning that our revenues are falling short of our expenditures by about $900,000, almost $1 million. And then it's one of those things where we try not to get that too far out of whack, because the fact of the matter is then in the future years, I'm going to have to propose increases to cover the shortfall. So looking at 23, 24, and if we scroll up to the top, back to the top again, we are, when we walk through the cost drivers, we are proposing to do a fee increase, and it looks like the ballpark around 3%. And what a 3% increase is going to allow us to do is basically generate roughly almost like $35 million in revenue, total revenue. I'll have you scroll back down, Gary. With our expenditures being close to 35 million at 34.9, which then puts our expenditures and revenues pretty much balanced, basically, meaning our revenues are exceeding the expenditures in the program by about $53,000, and starting to drive the reserve down slightly. Now, we'll talk about this a little more in a minute. When we're looking at the 3% increase, definitely looking at adjusting fees on our permits, licenses, and pending applications. The other side of the house, the FERC side of the house, we'll continue to evaluate that, comparing the actual expenditures in the program with the revenues, to see if there's a needed increase in that side of the house. So I just wanted to bring that up, but we're still in the process of looking at the expenditure reports to make a determination if an adjustment on the FERC program will be needed for the upcoming fiscal year. So before we move over to the cost drivers, which are basically, driving the cost of the expenditures in the water rights program, are there any questions currently on the fund condition statement? Hey, good afternoon, Steve. You have your hand raised? I think you're on mute, Steve. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, it took me a moment to figure out that. Yeah, just a question on the fund reserve. I know you've used in the past the term prudent reserve. What reserve are you guys targeting as you're looking at the budget, and what has been your historic variability relative to that target?
So yeah, that's a great question. So on the WDPF side of the things, which we're talking $180 million program, so a lot bigger fund. On that fund, we're trying to drive to about a 5% reserve. In this one, I do like to carry a little larger fund because it's a small. The fund itself is a smaller fund. Expenditures and revenues, programs, basically about a $35 million fund. And at any given time, if you get hit by some economic uncertainty, it could have some impacts to the fund. I would say that we would like to try to drive this around 10%. But even with a 10% reserve, I also do want to ensure that the structural of the program, meaning the revenues and expenditures, stay online. And so over years, I mean, by us not raising fees as much, and by continue built on our expenditures, I believe we'll get there. But yeah, right now I don't really want us to get too out of whack with our expenditures. One other thing here, which is an unknown, and if we can move up to the top, Josh, excuse me, apologies, Gary. There's a thing here called prior year adjustments, and what a prior adjustment is basically our accounting office takes a look at contract dollars that are in the fund, additional personal services that are in the fund, and we don't get these numbers until they basically close the books. And there's been times when these numbers could become a negative. So I won't have that information probably till about August. Now, last year in 21-22, it was a positive amount that got put back into the fund, which was good, which then helped build the fund. But what I will say is that because it takes a full year for accounting to kind of fully close the books, and the prior adjustments don't take place until end of July, end of June, once the fiscal year is over. It's somewhat of an unknown for me at this point. So I always try to carry a little bit in the prior year, just knowing if a prior adjustment comes in, I'll be able to cover it.
Do you happen to know the historic negative range on that?
I don't. I know that I've seen it as high as like $1 million, but I don't on this spreadsheet right now. I don't have that, Steve.
Great, thank you. I would just hope that we look at these numbers, that we don't just stick to a percentage, but arrive at a number for that reserve that's realistic. And to get to that, you may have to run a structural deficit for a couple of years. But
correct, understandable, yes.
Thank you.
So I'm not seeing any other questions on the fund condition. Let's move to item 3, but we can always come back. Item 3 and item 4 kind of go together. So, and Josh, I believe you're going to go ahead and take this one.
Yes, thank you. All right, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and go over the cost drivers. So first off, good afternoon, everyone. So this table we're looking at, the first one is the fee setting budget from last year, about 34.1 million, and then followed by the governor's May revise for 23-24 at about 34.9 million, which is about an $842,000 difference, or 2.5% change. In March, it was about 2%. So just a slight, about half percentage change, which we'll get into a little bit lower here if you just want to scroll down just a little bit. All right, and then the second table, we'll go over these in detail, but the state ops, the pro rata, and the CDTFA numbers have not changed since March. They're the same amounts. The only difference is the BCP. For state operations, this cost driver was about a $450,000 change, or about 1.3%. It's primarily for employee compensation, salaries, healthcare, retirement. Plus, it reflects the decreased contribution to the cannabis program, which again remains the same as March. Moving on to pro rata, it's about $222,000, 0.7% change. Same as March. And then the CDTFA, which is the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. This allotment is for the expenditures incurred for processing the water rights annual invoices and collection activities. Slight increase of about 6,000, which is negligible, about 0%. So like I said before, the biggest change is the BCP for Division of Admin Services support at $164,000. This will fund about 15 permanent positions, and then the water rights portion of that is about 164,000. The purpose of this is the resources will be used to address increased administrative workload due to rapid evolving program growth, increased resource management and tracking workload, and reporting requirements for the Division of Admin Services. So once again, pretty much the same as March, just with the addition of the BCP at about 0.5% increase. So about 2.5% overall. I see, Robert, you have a question. David, do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yeah. And just to add to what Josh was saying, so the administrative services support BCP as a total is $2.4 million, and supports 15 positions, as Josh mentioned, and that BCP is being spread out to multiple funds through the water board, including the waste discharge permit fund and water rights and safe drinking water accounts. You mentioned 3 of them, and the 164,000 of the 2.4 million is the water rights share. So the 842,000 is again the budget increase from what we set our fees off of from 22-23, which represents a 2.5% increase in the program cost. And again, to us to achieve and generate that 842,000, it's approximately about a 3% fee increase on the fee payers. So Bob, I will open it up to you. You have a question?
Yeah, about the data modernization BCP, as long as we're talking about BCPs, I respect, first of all, that Eric and Diane are on the call. That's very nice. And secondly, and Eric has explained now in some detail at the workshop, the benefits to fee payers of this BCP, which may or may not manifest. However, the BCP is profoundly statewide and applies to basically every single Californian that drinks water, because it helps us manage that. So again, I would say that that particular BCP is best left to the general fund. And I would support that strongly. And I have one codicil, as long as we're talking about it, is that the division, and I'll bring this up with Eric, but you should be aware because it's financial. We might want to consider establishing an access fee to that improved data management. There are state agencies that do charge people access fees, which would help create revenue for this fund. So going forward, and be a good time to start thinking about it now, some sort of access fee. And billing other state agencies for a service performed, as you know, is commonly done. It is not unprecedented. And then last, as long as I've got the floor, and I apologize, on the reserve, the level is a bit high, but the fee increase is a bit low. Thank you, guys. So it might be good to retain the status quo as kind of a hedge against adverse figures next year. We have been known to use that reserve, spend it down a bit to help ratepayers. So anyway, it's a thought, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. Are there any questions from the emails?
No email questions at this time.
Okay. Well, let's move to the next agenda item. Which is actually item number 5, which is the proposed changes to the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act fee regulations. Joining us is Sarah Sugar.
Hi, David. Thank you. Somehow, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. So I'll keep this short. I'll just preface this by saying that the SGMA program has its own account within the Water Rights Fund. And so water rights fees can't be used to support the SGMA program, and SGMA fees cannot be used to support water rights. We're not proposing any changes to the fees themselves this year, but we are proposing some cleanup in terms of making our definition of what qualifies as a meter a little more specific, and also broadening who who would qualify as a qualified individual under our fee regulations. And that's our very brief update.
Right, thank you. And that'll be part of our reg package when we go to the board in September. And so we again working with Sarah and her group and putting together the language. So it'll be available before we go to the board. And if anyone wanted to comment on it, there'd be an opportunity to do that. Does anyone have any questions for Sarah? So I am not hearing any or seeing any. So Sarah, thank you. Appreciate it for your time.
Thank you.
Which leads us to the open discussion. And I was just going to ask if Eric Eckel or any of the program staff would like to add anything at this point.
Hi, Dave. Just a quick follow-up, and again, Bob, we can follow up with this. I think we've touched on this idea of fee for access before, and that's kind of a hard no/anathema to kind of the entire kind of auspices of open water data in 1755. So, a fee for accessing this data is not something that we're going to consider. The BCP, which was not part of this year's fees, it was part of last year's for the data modernization, is at present, I can't do the math in my head, $30 million, of which 27.5 million was general fund and 2.5 million is water right fund. That is a pretty clear reflection of the point that you made, that water is, an issue for the entire state, not just the fee payers, and that's why the 95% of it, roughly 92% of it, is in fact funded by the general fund. There's another $31 million as part of this pending budget, and so again, when you kind of run that all up, 61.5 million, of which only 2.5 million is water right fee payer funded. So that again, very much tilts towards the general fund overall. I think that's it.
Thank you, Eric. Let me ask you, Gary, are there any email questions at this time?
No email questions at this time.
And I'm not seeing any hands raised for any additional questions. Which moves us into next steps. So our next fee stakeholder meeting is scheduled for August 3rd. By then, we should have a signed governor's budget, so the Budget Act should be available. And so we'll be able to evaluate everything that comes out in the governor's budget. I don't anticipate there'll be any surprises specifically to the Water Rights Fund. And also in the next month or so, we should have additional data from Fiscal regarding expenditures and revenues, which also helps us update our fund conditions, which of course also has an impact how we want to drive our fees based on the fund reserves. So we'll be taking a look at that and providing updates. So Steve, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just a really general question since we're kind of at the end towards the end of the meeting.
Sure.
Historically, the bills came out in the November timeframe. This past year, they were quite a bit later. Do you know the approximate timing for this coming year?
I would say they're going to go back to that November timeframe. We were working with because the bills go out through CDTFA, and we had a little bit of delay working with Cal EPA on all the regulations and information that goes over. And so I do anticipate, yes, this was the first year that there was some delay in the process, but I would anticipate them going back to basically that November timeframe.
Thank you. That was just really more of a budgeting question for those of us on this end.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'll just kind of take this moment as John Russell mentioned earlier, and just to recap, as you're looking at this data, and if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Cassandra, Josh, or John. And, if we need to involve appropriate water rights program staff, we'll be more than happy to do that. Again, appreciate everyone taking the time out today out of your schedule to attend the meeting. We appreciate that. So again, as I mentioned, next steps, August 3rd is the next stakeholder meeting. And then we're driving to September 20th as the board meeting, where at that time, staff will be potentially proposing a fee structure to the board. And 10 days prior to that, the agenda item will come out, which will give you an opportunity to comment. So again, I want to just thank everyone, thank program staff, appreciate the fee staff, all the stuff you do behind the scenes. And we'll be talking soon. Everyone have a good rest of the week. Thank you.